George Groves stops Andrea Di Lucia in the 5th. I know there's a lot of George Groves fans out there, and I like the way his fans turn up to his fights to support, and they're so vocal, and they got the band playing and all that type of stuff. So there may be quite a few George Groves fans watching this video. And I myself, I've always liked George Groves as a fighter. But I have to be honest, George Groves still don't look right to me. I know this is his first fight under Shane McGuigan, so we have to give him some time to transition. But to me, it just looks like there's still something missing. Ever since he got knocked out by Carl Froch in the rematch, this guy ain't been the same. There hasn't been the same sharpness. That's from what I can see. There hasn't been the same sharpness. There hasn't been the same power, particularly in his right hand. Here against Di Lucia, he was throwing the right hand a lot, but there just wasn't the same kind of mustard on it that there used to be. And Glenn McCrory, in the post-fight analysis on Sky, he was suggesting that maybe it was the fact that George Groves' stance is so wide. He's got his feet so far apart and therefore can't get his weight over sufficiently to be able to generate power in the right hand. But I don't think it's that, because under Adam Booth, he had a wide stance as well. In fact, I think his stance was just as wide as it was in this fight against Di Lucia, if not wider, when he was with Adam Booth. And that's one of Adam Booth's things. He teaches his fighters that wide stance. David Haye had a very wide stance for the majority of the time that he was under Adam Booth. And that wide stance, it can have its limitations from time to time. Okay, you have to know when to use a wide stance and when to, shorten up the space between your feet in certain situations when you're in a fight. You don't have to have a wide stance for the whole fight necessarily. And when he was under Adam Booth, George Groves, he was hitting very hard with the right hand with a wide stance. And as we know, David Haye with that wide stance has got a tremendously powerful right hand. So I don't really think it's that. I just think there is something mentally not quite there with Groves. He got cobra'd by Carl Froch. And I just feel like psychologically George Groves needs a rest. I don't even think it's just physically. I think it's psychologically. He needs a rest. He wanted to get right back on the horse immediately after getting knocked out by Carl Froch. And that does show mental toughness and fortitude. But I just feel like he needs to step away from boxing, clear out the cobwebs from his mind psychologically, and wait until the desire for boxing and the enthusiasm for boxing really comes back, the love for it. Right now, he seems like he's determined. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is just the way I'm reading it. Right now, he seems like he's determined, stubbornly determined, but he don't seem like he's loving it to me. That zest, that old cockiness that Groves used to have in the ring seems to be gone. That's just the way I'm reading it, people. Maybe you disagree. What I can say, though, about this Di Lucia performance, the right hand, like I say, was lacking power. What I did like, though, is his use of the jab. And he was using his jab far more frequently in this fight than he was in most of his fights under Adam Booth. Adam Booth had him feinting a lot with the left hand, not really jabbing much. And that was Booth's thing. He did the same with Haye. Haye would hardly ever jab when he was under Adam Booth. He would feint constantly with the left hand and then look to draw your lead and beat you to the punch or counter you with the right hand. Here in this fight, Shane McGuigan has clearly worked on George Groves' jab. And that's pretty much what won him this fight. He was busting up Di Lucia with the jab. He actually dropped him at one point with a body shot. I think it was the jab to the body that really hurt him, and he might have followed up with a right hand. So, yeah, the jab was definitely improved. I'm glad to see that. But I don't know. Maybe he needs a big fight. Maybe there needs to be some danger there. I don't know what it is. But George Groves is just lacking that edge at the moment. And the fact that he's lacked it for several fights now, to me, is very concerning. If you lacked it for one or two fights, okay, that can happen. But to lack it for several fights, that's a serious problem as far as I'm concerned. Now, I remember when Lucian Bute got knocked out by Carl Froch, and he came back in a fight against Denis Grachev, and he looked terrible in that fight. He looked a shell of himself. Then he fought a little while later Jean Pascal, and he looked a little bit better against Pascal, but still quite poor. Then most recently, he fought James DeGale. He might have had a few other fights in between against lesser opposition, but most recently he fought James DeGale. And I thought the version of Lucian Bute that we saw against James DeGale was the best Lucian Bute I've seen since the Carl Froch fight. That was pretty much the same Lucian Bute pre-Froch, in my opinion. He looked energized, he looked confident, he wasn't wilting under James DeGale's attacks. He, when he fought Denis Grachev, it's like he was scared to death of getting hit. Anytime Grachev half caught him with a decent shot, he was backing up to the ropes. He looked worried. He looked concerned. But there was none of that against James DeGale. He had a steely, resolute look about him. And time is the great healer. It took time for Lucian Bute to overcome the ghosts of that Carl Froch beating. It took him, 2 years maybe longer, until he started performing properly again like he did against DeGale. Even though DeGale won, although I thought he was personally closer than the judges had it, it took him a while to get that type of zest back. So maybe it's just going to take George Groves a while. I'm just concerned that he's not giving himself enough time to heal psychologically. Sometimes I think it is good to actually step away from the ring and step away from boxing to get your mojo back. So, I don't know. It wasn't a bad performance necessarily against De Lucia. 5th round stoppage. I think Bute stopped him in a similar amount of time. So it wasn't bad, so to speak, but it just wasn't the George Groves of old, in my opinion. The sharpness just wasn't quite there. And that's what he needs. He needs that edge. He needs that pep in his step. And another thing that concerns me about George Groves is blaming everyone for everything that goes wrong in his career. Not taking responsibility. I think maybe taking responsibility might actually help him get over this mental block that he seems to have. I think it might help rejuvenate himself mentally if he can admit that he was to blame for a lot of the stuff that's gone wrong in his career, rather than blaming it on everybody else. I know it sounds kind of petty, but sometimes things like that can unblock certain mental blockages. All right, this might be sounding kind of wishy-washy and vague to some of you, but that's how I feel. Sometimes you got to admit things and be honest with yourself to get the best out of yourself. And it was interesting in the post-fight interview, Shane McGuigan didn't seem too happy with the performance. George Groves said he was happy and this and that, and that's what I expected. And again, that's quite troubling to me. I would have preferred it if George Groves said, the performance wasn't really the way I wanted it to be. I wasn't getting the right hand off properly, this, that, and the other. I would have preferred to hear him say that. But it's like he's trying to convince himself that nothing was wrong in that performance, that he was the George Groves of old. That's how I interpreted it. But Shane McGuigan was like, I'll give it a 7 out of 10 or a strong 7, whatever he said. And I think he was being generous. The look on his face suggested that he was being generous when he said that. I don't think Shane McGuigan was that impressed with what he saw. Might be wrong, but that's my interpretation of what he said and how he looked. So I hope George Groves takes Shane McGuigan's criticism, if there is any criticism behind the scenes, on board. I hope he doesn't try and reject everything and blame things on everyone else and act like there's nothing wrong in his performance. I hope he's going to listen, because if he does, then maybe he can improve and we might be able to get back to the same George Groves we saw in the first Froch fight and, the George Groves we saw prior to the Froch rematch. Drop your comments in the comment section below, people. Let me know what you felt about George Groves' performance and where you see him going forward. The super middleweight division at the moment is not exactly that strong. Since Andre Ward has moved up, who is there really? There's Arthur Abraham. There's DeGale, who Groves actually beat, but that was the Groves of old, and it was a very close fight anyway. So you got Abraham, you got DeGale, you got Badu Jack, obviously. They're the 3 main guys in the division. And then you've got The Durrell brothers still hanging around. So it's a decent division, but not particularly strong at this point in time. There's no real standout fighter or standout fighters since Ward moved up. Kessler's retired. He got old and retired, and Froch is retired. So it's not quite what it was, but we'll see how it pans out. And in this current super middleweight landscape, if Groves can even get back to 80% of what he was prior to the Froch rematch, he probably can pick up a world title. The Badou Jack fight was very close. So it's certainly not inconceivable that he could beat Badou Jack in a rematch. James DeGale right now, I wouldn't fancy Groves' chances against James DeGale at this point in time. But if he continues improving, you never know. And Arthur Abraham, I don't know. Abraham's a very hard puncher. Maybe, not the kind of puncher he was at middleweight, but he's still a hurtful puncher. He's not no Golovkin, but he's hurtful. And I do worry about Groves against Arthur Abraham, the current version of Groves. Sooner or later, Abraham's going to open up on you, and he does have them spiteful, solid little hands on him. And I do worry about Groves. If Groves was hurt by Badou Jack, I think Arthur Abraham can definitely hurt him. It's a winnable fight stylistically for Groves, but I want to see him looking more solid and more purposeful than he was against De Lucia before I would be confident in him beating Arthur Abraham. So anyway, like I say, drop your comments in the comment section below, people. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me, it's all good. Just let me know. All right? It's your boy Hatman. I'm out.